Do I start?
Whenever you want to start. Don't worry about it. I can cut it off and change it however you want it to.
Okay. Oh, now this makes me nervous. Hey, you.
What day is it?
Now I'm going to say, hey, you all. Today is Sunday, March 3rd, 2013. And I thank you. I hope you don't get too bored with this video because I do have a tendency to talk too much. Okay.
Good. Well, let's start off saying, tell us about yourself and your full name and your maiden name and your birth date and your parents' names and brothers and sisters.
Okay. Hey, my name is Eleanor Marie Jensen Lockhart. I was born July 31st, 1930, and my mother's name was Marie Emma Weil Jensen, and my father's name was Alfred Thorpe Jensen, and I have one sister, Nancy Lee Jensen Bruner, and I just have the one sister. I had a baby sister, well, a sister that died. She only lived 4 days, and she was the blue baby, but my mother didn't go to a regular hospital. She had a midwife. Midwife delivered the baby, and back then they didn't know what to do with blue babies. So the baby, little girl, Marion, she is buried up in the family cemetery. Only lived it on 5 days.
Where's the family cemetery?
In Flushing, Michigan.
How were you delivered?
I was delivered, I don't know. It was either vaginal. It had to be vaginal.
Was it in a hospital? Or?
In a hospital. Oh, yes. I went, the doctor, I even had my doctor, I got a picture of my doctor. He was an obstetrician.
And what day were you born? What day and date?
I was born, the day of the week, I don't remember what the day of the week was, but I was born July 31st.
What year?
1930.
1930. You know what was going on that time when you were born?
They were just winding up the Depression, so it was really bad times. My father was digging ditches for 50 cents an hour, and of course my mother didn't work. She was busy taking care of me, and the economy was really bad then because they were just coming out of, well, actually I think it's probably in the middle of the Depression, basically.
You're the oldest.
I'm gonna check and make sure this is. Right, okay, good. I don't want to be talking. I want to have all this and have the microphone off. That'd be bad.
That would not be good, no.
So what is the earliest event you know about our family's history, dating back from you or Grandpa's side as far back as you can reach or know?
That I personally remember, or just information?
Information that you know.
Okay, well, I guess what I heard as a child growing up, my father was born in Denmark, one of 10 children. He was born in 1895, I'm sorry, in Denmark, one of 10 children, but he had twin siblings, but they died. And he was the only one that left, well, he left Denmark at the age of 17 because at that time in Denmark they had to go into the army, and he refused to serve the king because the king hadn't served him. So he worked his way over on a coal boat over to Argentina, and he was in Argentina and Brazil probably for a good 10 years, working as a ranchman. I've got a lot of pictures, but I don't have any idea where they are from, someplace in Argentina. And in fact, he was really shanghaied down in Montevideo. That's how they used to get people to go on the boat. So they gave him, I don't know, some kind of drug, and he ended up working on a boat outside of Montevideo. And then the boat brought him back, and then he decided he didn't like the South America, so then he came up the West Coast, and came to Seattle, Washington, because he had a brother, his older brother, that had come from Denmark. And there he worked in the lumber camps and did miscellaneous, stayed with his brother and his sister-in-law, but then the language that he learned was all pretty bad language, and my aunt did not like that kind of language used in front of her children. So he left and worked his way across, stopped in Kansas City and got his mechanic's license. He didn't like doing that, so then he came to Minneapolis and started working as a carpenter, a tradesman, and that's where he met my mother, in Minneapolis. and they got married there. And then that was times were not good, and there was a big poster in the post office that said GM wants you. So he took the poster off the wall, and they went to Michigan. They drove to Michigan, Detroit, Michigan, or Flint, Michigan, actually. And they weren't going to hire him, so he pulled out the poster, and they hired him. But he didn't like that kind of work, basically. He was definitely a tradesman, so he started doing carpentry work and building houses. And back in the early 30s, he did do a lot of building, construction, and he was excellent in building. And then he bought a lumber yard, which it didn't do really well because he was not a good businessman money-wise. But people would, and he had all the trade of all the people that were brought in, or they called foreigners, all the Swedes and the Danes and the Polish people. They liked him because he was so-called a foreigner, so they would come and ask him to, he was tremendous in math. I can remember one man coming into the lumber yard and said, "Hey, Al, I want to build this tool shed. Figure it out for me." And so the guy gave him the dimensions, and he just sat there and figured it out in his head. How many 2x4s, 2x6s, and how many nails, and then he sold it to him, and the guy built it. So he was really good in math. I did not get that gene from him at all. And then he did a lot of, I guess his biggest fault was he was a pretty heavy drinker. And he would go on periods where he wouldn't drink at all, and then he would consume a lot. And he was, well, I guess you would say he was stopped for drunk driving many times. But he belonged to the Masons, and the judge was in the same Masonic club, and so they never did anything about it. They never took his license away, nothing. He just kept on driving. And as I say, there were several times, but he never had to drive far. It was either from downtown. We were only 2 blocks from downtown. And he just invited people over all the time to have a drink or something. And then he didn't do any personal building after he had the lumber yard. And then he sold the lumber yard, I guess, before I got married. And then he did just small carpentry work. And that's it. My mother grew up on a farm of German descent. Both her parents were born in the United States, but her grandparents were born over in Stuttgart, near Stuttgart, Germany. And from there, they came over and settled. There's a tremendous German settlement around Minneapolis, St. Paul, and that's where they came. And then it would be my great-grandma and grandpa. They had 6 children. My mother had 5 siblings, and one was killed in World War I. He was in the Navy. He died in the Philippines. And the other brothers all stayed. My mother was the only one that left Minnesota and came to Michigan. Her 2 brothers, and her sister were still there in Minnesota, and they were all farmers. They farmed all their life. They had huge farms, and they eventually grew corn and peas for the Green Giant. This Green Giant came in and took over most of the land. They rented the land from the farmers and gave them the seed, and then they would sell it. I don't know how it worked out, but that's what they grew, peas and corn for the Green Giant company. And then I can remember every summer my mother and I and my sister would take the bus from Flint, Michigan, all the way up to Minnesota. And there we would, my mother spent about 6 weeks there helping on the farm. And I can remember when they did thrashing, they would go from neighbor to neighbor, and it would take about 3 days on one farm to do all the thrashing. And then there must have been about 20 farmers. And the women would make sandwiches and carry the sandwiches and lemonade out to the workers in the field in these huge bushel baskets. And then that would be their lunch, and then they'd come back in and have a huge dinner around 4 o'clock. Chicken, and it was just enormous. The whole table was just loaded with food and desserts, and these men ate, and then that was it for the day. But that was a fun time for me to watch them and help them with the. Oh, I didn't do much help at my age, but it was fun just being there in the environment.
What is thrashing?
They take. They have this huge combine, and as they go through, it goes through and picks out. Or actually, I don't really know how to explain it to you.
Is it corn?
Corn, and they did the corn, and well, the wheat they would go through and take the wheat and the oats that they use for feed, and this huge machine would go through, pull it up, and then it would grind it up, and then I actually don't know what they did out in the field.
I'm gonna put some water over here.
And then I can remember one time my cousin and I were out in the corn crib. We had gathered eggs from the chicken coop, so we went in the corn crib, which was empty at that time. That's where they kept the corn. And we broke 24 eggs. And my aunt was pretty upset with us, but it was kind of fun breaking all those eggs. But there was no, they all was outdoor plumbing. And there were no, well, they did have one fan, but it was hot. But you got used to it. Sleeping at night, there was, slept with the windows open. And in the winter, it was cold.
How did your parents meet?
In Minneapolis, and my mother was working at a store that was like, she was working at Donaldson's, which was a family department store in Minneapolis, and my father was doing some construction work down there, and that, I don't know whether a sheet tripped or something, and he happened to be there, and that's what my father always used to say she fell over him. But I don't know how true that story was, because she never gave me the exact of how they did meet. And I guess the house that we lived in, I wish you could see a picture. It looked like a derelict house, like nobody could live in there. It was on a hill, and my father bought it something like for $2,000, he and the bank. And then he slowly remodeled a lot of it. But at first there was no indoor plumbing, no heat, so to speak, so we had a coal furnace, and we had one room in this dirt basement where the coal truck would come up, put a chute down, and fill the whole room with coal. And then my father, we had this huge furnace, would take a great big shovel about the size of a snow shovel and shovel the coal into the furnace. And then when it got cold, go down and shovel more coal. Well, then later on we got real sophisticated. He got a smaller furnace, which was wood burning, and we had a stoker in which he had to cut up wood and fill the stoker. When it got cold, you put more wood in. And so that was, we did that for a long time before they even got oil heat. Because I was in high school, I think, when we had that. So we had no heat upstairs. The only heat that came up was through the register. There was a big register in the ceiling, and that supposedly would heat the 2 bedrooms upstairs that we had. And, of course, we had feather ticks. They were huge, like a down comforter, only they called them feather ticks then. And that's how we slept. And we would get dressed either by the register or downstairs by a register. And it was cold, but, we had enough clothes, so I guess I never paid any attention to it. I don't remember being so cold. And then we had, on the back of the kitchen was a wood shed. You went through this wood shed, and then there was it was an outdoor toilet, but it was inside. We didn't have to go out in the cold. We could walk from the kitchen to the wood shed into this bathroom, and I can remember there were three openings, and then there was a little one for my sister. And they were all painted pink. Now, I don't know who painted them pink. But then I was about 5 or 6 years old when my father dug the septic tank, which he did himself, which took weeks, a huge hole. And then they put brick or cement block around it. And then when the septic tank was ready to go and we had a plumber install the commode, and my father said, you can flush anything down there. Well, I flushed an apple down, and that plugged it up, which she wasn't too happy with me. And let me see what else.
Did you live in the same house growing up?
The whole 18 years, yeah.
Tell what it was called, the house on the hill.
Oh, the house, well, that was just the house on the hill, the Jensen house on the hill, because it was 2 blocks from downtown, and there was, at the time, it was a huge, I thought it was a huge hill, and the kids in the winter used to slide down. Had a couple of bad accidents. Kids broke their legs. They would take the sleds and the old toboggans, and they'd slide down our front or slide down the driveway, and the driveway went down right into the street, which was, you know, it was not a popular street, but that's where the kids were. All winter long, kids were sliding on the hill.
How many paved roads were around you?
The main street, excuse me, as I remember, the street going up was paved. Our driveway was dirt all the way up. But the street in front of us, Henry Street, was dirt. But the street that went to downtown, that was blacktop, really, or I don't know. I don't really remember, but it was some sort of pavement equipment.
So going back to kind of an extension of our family, were there any other family members, great aunts or relatives that had any had any significant office, or like they were famous, they were military officers, captains, political, anyone in politics or anyone?
On my mother's side, it would be her grandfather was in the Minnesota Senate, or I think the Minnesota Assembly is what they called it. Then he was it would be her grandpa, the one that came, I'm sure, but there was William Wiles Sr. was in the Minnesota Assembly, whatever that was back then. But nobody, I don't know about my father's relatives in Denmark. They were in the military, but I don't think that they helped. I don't know. I really don't know. He never did say too much about them.
So, when you were about 11 or 12, U.S. was just entering World War II.
Mm-hmm.
What do you remember about that time?
I remember quite a bit. We had ration stamps, and because my father, he had a truck, and I think he had a truck and a car, and so that was gas. He got enough gas just to run the truck for business. And then I can remember going in, we did most of our shopping in Flint, Michigan, which was about 10 miles from Flushing. Flushing had a population of only 3,000, so it was a pretty little farm town. Everybody knew everybody. Doors were never locked, and you just knew what was going on in town. We had air raid sirens, and they would the alarm would go off at night, usually after dark, and that meant that we all had to turn off all our lights. There could be no lights, and then they would have people that I think they were with they must have been with the city volunteers that would go around and make sure that nobody had any lights on at all. And that happened probably once a week, the air raid sirens. And then every week we bought savings bonds, and every week I'd take my quarter to school and buy a savings stamp is what it was. And then when we got up to $18, we got a $25 savings bond, and that was all the kids did to see who could get bonds the quickest. But I only could take 25 cents a week to buy a bond. And then we saved all the wrappers from the gum, the foil, any foil that you used, and you would make great big aluminum. We didn't get many because my father nor my mother smoked. My father chewed tobacco, which I still have the old spittoon, but he never did it in the house. So I don't remember him chewing tobacco too much. So I never did get very big aluminum balls. But there was a big drive on. I mean, everybody was, patriotic. And let's see. But it was an exciting time. And then when VJ Day, which was in August, let's see, I must have been, I was 14. My friend Susie's dad took us to Flint, where they had the big parade. It was jam-packed. It was really quite exciting. With confetti going all over the place and everybody running around hugging and kissing everybody. That was VJ Day over Japan.
Okay. So, let's see. I think you've talked about a lot of stuff. What would you say would be your best childhood memory? Or memories or something?
I remember getting my mother never spanked us. My father used a razor strap occasionally, and the one time I remember the razor strap is my mother called me in for lunch, and I said, "Shut up, go back in the house." So he came home for lunch, and guess what? I was called into the bathroom and swatted once across my butt with the razor strap. The razor strap is a long, do you know what a razor strap is? It's a long piece of leather that when the men use straight razors, my father always shaved with a straight razor, and that's how you sharpened the razor blade, was on this long leather belt and the leather strap. And
That's your favorite childhood memory?
no, that is a childhood memory. That is a childhood memory. I remember when they brought my sister home from the hospital. She was born early, and they really didn't expect her to live. And they brought her home and put her on the couch, and she started crying. And I can remember standing there telling my mother, "Take her back. I don't like her." And she was just, all she did was scream. And I was 5 years old at the time, so I was not too happy with that.
What about high school? You were pretty popular in high school, weren't you?
Well, I guess I ran around with the in crowd, so to speak. Well, that was it. There was actually there was the town people and the country people, because we had a consolidated school system. But it so happened there were 2 or 3 country kids that blended in real well with the town people. And the town, so.
Were you a town person?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And so it was that we just did a lot of things together. One of the fellows that was a country boy had a car. And so that was good at 16, because they didn't have any bus transportation. The kids had to find their own transportation to high school. So it just so happened that Delbert was his name. We were lucky because he had a car, and we could go, different places. And we could leave school during our lunch hour, because sometimes I lived close enough to walk. We didn't have school lunches, but I often took my lunch to school simply so I could eat with my friends. And then sometimes we'd go downtown to the drugstore to get something to drink. They didn't, I can't even remember what they called them. They were like a 7-Eleven, a Slurpee or something like that. And then we'd get back to school and have our classes.
Weren't you the princess everybody to this day still talks about you should have won or something? Homecoming?
Oh, I was homecoming. I was runner-up in homecoming. My friend was homecoming queen, and I was first runner-up. But that was only just a few people that thought I should have won. And I really didn't care. But that was exciting. They did a lot of things. They took us out to the airport. We had an airplane ride and went to different contestants. And this was the first homecoming that Flushing ever had. And that was my senior year in high school.
You were part of the student government, weren't you?
I was secretary of the student council. And what else did I do?
What did they say about your complexion?
Peaches and cream. That was in my yearbook. I didn't. I was in several extemporaneous speeches. I did one on Home Without a Fence. That was the Japanese internment. And I did another talk in Flanders Fields, the poppies grow. That was all about the soldiers in World War I. I didn't write the speech. I just had to memorize it. And then we would go from, I think I won in Flushing, and then the next place we went. I don't know how they even rotated, but the winners went on to probably, I don't know. I didn't get to regional or state. And let's see what else. I went to the prom all 4 years in high school, which was kind of, it was a junior senior prom, and if a junior or a senior asked you in ninth grade, you could go. And I did. And then, when you went into high school, they always had ninth grade initiation, and that was the day that you wore old clothes, and all of the upperclassmen could paint lipstick. They could do anything they wanted to with you as far as decorating you. And so they would paint everybody with lipstick, or some of them even had, it wasn't black paint, it was like charcoal that you could wash off. And then you had old clothes on. That was big time, but I don't think there's such a thing as initiation into high school anymore.
What was your favorite song?
My favorite song? Oh.
High school, or multiple songs?
I guess one of them was one, Drinking Rum and Coca-Cola, Mairzy Oats. Oh, there's just so many songs, and the words are so goofy, but basically they aren't any more goofy than what they were. Like Mairzy Oats, Dozy Oats. I mean, that was a real popular song, and yeah.
Did you go to church growing up?
Yes, I did. I definitely did. We had to go into Flint because the Lutheran church nearby was the Missouri Synod. The Missouri Synod did not allow anybody to belong to the Masonic order, and my father was in the Masons. So we had to go into Flint, and I remember taking the bus for 2 years every Saturday into confirmation. That was such a drag because I had to we did all memory work. Everything was memorized. And let me see what else. I had a big birthday party that my name got in the paper when I was 10 years old. I had a great big store-bought birthday cake. And
What was your favorite pastime back then, your first job?
My first job, my favorite pastime was reading.
Yes.
Always read. And then I had to help my father in the lumberyard, which I absolutely hated to do. I just hated sitting in that old office. But I would take a book and read. My father was always there, so I had to take care of the money. But that was all. I hated it. And then I got a job at the library, which he didn't like. I worked part-time, 50 cents an hour. And then I would get books from the library and bring them home at 9 o'clock. And then I would sit by then we had an upstairs bathroom. I would sit in there in the bathroom with the lights on and read. But see, my father didn't know. He didn't want me to reading that late at night. My mother never said much, but my father used to read mystery. They were paperback westerns, probably an 8x11, really popular western magazines. And he would read, that's what he read all the time. But we weren't supposed to, well, my sister does not like to read to this day, but that was my favorite pastime, was reading. And then, of course, in the winter, we did a lot of outside sports, which I did not like because it was cold. But I did not want to stay home on a Friday and a Saturday night, so I would go ice skating. And we usually went out to one of the fellows that lived on a farm, and they would freeze a big ice skating rink for us. And then we'd get to go in and have hot chocolate, which is what I wanted to do. And I only went because I didn't want to stay home, but I didn't like it. Then we had a lot of hay rides in the summer out in the country. Somebody, it usually would be one of the country boys would get a tractor and a huge trailer, and then it would be all filled with hay. And then we would ride, probably very dangerous, but that was fun. And I can remember the last senior prom, I went with the principal's son. I was not going with him steady, but we went. And the thing of after the prom, everybody would drive down to Saginaw, which was about 35 miles away, go out to eat. The prom ended at 12 o'clock, and and there would be, I don't know why we weren't killed, but it was a big thing to see how fast all of these fellows could drive. It was a paved highway, just a 2-lane highway from Flushing to Saginaw, and we went 80 miles an hour down there, no seat belts, nothing. But it so happened the policeman stopped us, and Don, the principal's son, got a ticket for speeding, which he should have. Well, the next day, the principal calls me up and wants to know the whole story. I felt so sorry for that kid. I really did. He was just embarrassed to no end. But the principal was very strict on his son. But those cars were following so close it could have been disastrous. But you know, at the age of 16, 17, I guess you just don't think about those things. But I think about that now when kids are driving that fast. And there were speed limits, but you know, on a country paved road, nobody paid much attention. But there were cars going the other way too.
Did you have your driver's license?
I got my driver's license without even taking a road test, simply because the sheriff lived down the street and said, "Oh, I know you can drive. I see you driving all the time." And he gave me a license. No test, nothing. But things were a lot different. You got away with a lot, and since I can remember in first grade, I didn't go to kindergarten because I didn't have kindergarten. In first grade, we had to raise our hand when we wanted to go to the bathroom. And I had my hand up, but the teacher did not see me. So I ended up wetting my pants. I got home from school that afternoon, and my dad knew about it. Because he happened to be downtown, and the teacher happened to be downtown in the drugstore, and she told him. So you couldn't do anything in town but what somebody would find out and tell your parents. Somehow, I mean, it just seemed like the gossip line was always open.
What was your favorite restaurant to go to in town? Or just outside of
I don't, it was at the corner. It was an ice cream, I don't remember the name, an ice cream store, and that's where the kids, we all used to hang out, and they never pushed us out because the kids weren't rowdy. You just sit there and talk, and I don't even remember what there was to talk about. Probably about school and teachers and other kids, and we never had anybody in my class or the class before, a few classes before, that got pregnant in high school. And they would hear of people in some of the small towns where, oh, that girl in 10th grade got pregnant. But there was nothing in our high school, because I only had 81 in my graduating class. So
when did people start become sexually active?
I really don't know. I suppose they didn't talk about birth control. And I think, well, I know they had condoms. They had condoms then. But I don't think it was not pushed like it is now. And we had a special, I think I was in 7th grade when they had what they called, it was like a sex educational class, but they didn't call it that. And I think probably then every girl's fear was becoming pregnant. And that's why there was not a lot of illegitimate kids born. Because that was, you know, that was taboo. And now people don't think anything about it. But it was really frowned upon, particularly in your smaller towns.
Well, we're going to break here. We're going to take a